Hey everyone, have you always thought negotiation is about bargaining and assertiveness? Well, join me because in this video I'll discuss my top 3 tips for successful negotiations and dispel those common misconceptions. So let's get into it. So tip number 1 is communicate well. And this is covered so well in Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference. I always kind of shied away from negotiation, to be honest. I always thought it was about banging your fist on the table and shouting at the other person. But Chris Voss discusses in his book that's exactly what you don't want to do, because it fires up your amygdala and puts you in that kind of fight or flight response, which means that you can't properly respond and listen to what the other person is saying. I can't tell you how many useful communication tips are in that book. There are things like asking open-ended questions, getting a no response, labeling and mirroring. I mean, the list goes on. I've got a huge list of questions for people that I've pulled out of that book, but just the actionable insights in that book is just mind-blowing. Would thoroughly recommend it. But yeah, here are my top communication tips. So first, it's important to remember that negotiation is not a battle, it's more of a dance, as Adam Grant says in his book. So the purpose of a negotiation is to essentially empower the other person through what you say and make it feel like that they're coming to the decision of what they want to do. And part of that is being non-threatening, labeling their emotions and appealing to that emotional side. So as we know now, humans are feeling first and then they post-rationalize. What Chris Voss's book talks about is appealing to that emotional side of things. So the idea is to make them feel positive emotions, make them feel like they're in control, and make them come to the decision themselves of what to do. And I think one of the reasons I like this approach is because it's the approach I've always taken, which is, build a good positive relationship with the person you're negotiating with, try to come to a sensible agreement that works for both of you. And that doesn't mean meeting in the middle, it means finding the leverage points in the deal. So can you flex versus where can they flex, and what's actually the really important thing you're trying to get to here. This is also covered in Robert Cialdini's book Influence, where he talks about the likability factor. So people are more likely to be influenced by people they like. So it's important to be friendly, be affable, make sure you try and build a good relationship with who you're negotiating with. Another key tactic is that people tend to like people more that they share food with, apparently. So if you can take the person out to dinner, that apparently works even more. And then probably the easiest and most powerful technique from Chris Voss's book is mirroring. So the idea that you can copy the last 3 words or maybe the key points from what someone else is saying, and people react to that in an amazing way. So there was an experiment, waiters positive reinforcement in one scenario, and then in the second scenario they did mirroring, and they found that their tips in the mirroring situation were just much higher. So we like to hear what we're saying mirrored back at us. We like what's familiar. So that's a technique you can use a lot. It will feel difficult to start out, but mirroring is actually a really powerful technique. And you don't have to just mirror in what people are saying. I would say, what does that person look like? What are they wearing? All these techniques can be used basically enhance communication and appeal to that likability factor. So my tip number 2 is to set a goal and say it. This sounds perhaps really simple, but yeah, I've always shied away from negotiation. I don't know why, there's something in my brain. I think maybe I'm always like someone that likes to get along with people and doesn't like to create any kind of conflict. So maybe it's that part of my brain that's just extra sensitive to conflict that means I'm very reluctant to start a negotiation. My technique's always been slightly different in that I just give until they respond or reciprocate. The problem with that is that doesn't always work, and sometimes you give so much and you don't feel like you've been adequately kind of compensated. So it's so important that you have at least a placeholder of what you want in your head, and then you verbalize it to the person you're negotiating with. I would say you should start out by using a very high anchor, because as Daniel Kahneman proved in his book Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, people anchor a lot to what's said first. So if you use a very kind of high anchor for a salary, say, it makes your actual kind of target seem a lot more reasonable. So that's a technique you can use for negotiating salaries. So again, putting myself in the manager's seat here, it's actually really helpful for me to hear person wants as well and what they're shooting for, because you naturally want to help people get there. If you don't say it out loud, then it's really difficult to kind of guess what people want. I was terrible at this. I think probably one of the low points of my career was when I really wanted a promotion, but I had a new line manager at the time, and this line manager didn't give it to me, and I was devastated. But I think one of the key reasons was that I just didn't say, I'm up for a promotion this year, my whole peer group is being promoted, I would be really upset if I didn't get one. I'm pretty sure if I'd said that out loud, then I would have been given it, but because I stayed quiet and just expected it to happen, it clearly didn't. And I think that's one of the things, like it's not always clear how much you've given to a situation, and you can't always just rely on that give and take. Area you can work on throughout the year, because obviously, I don't know about you, but for me, salary negotiations tend to happen like once a year. It's all very structured, but you can practice negotiating non-salary terms, and that just gets you used to the feeling of negotiating, the feeling of being scared and your amygdala firing. And it also shows to the people you're negotiating with that you're ambitious and persistent. I have to say, the first time I asked for a salary increase, I was absolutely terrified. I knew, because of the broader context of my role and the fact that I'd just been given a big salary increase, unlikely to get one, but I went and did it anyway just to practice, or just to experience that feeling, ask it, because I knew that when it came to a point when I perhaps did have some leverage, I should be well versed and well practiced and know what that feels like. So definitely get used to negotiating non-salary terms, and quite often if people feel like they can't give you the non-salary terms, then they might compensate you in other ways, which could work out beneficially as well. And then tip number 3 is just to give. So in a negotiation, you should have a really good case why you should get what you're asking for. You have to have done the groundwork there. So making sure that you actually have a point of leverage, i.e. you've been given a huge amount of extra responsibility, or you've been doing a huge amount of work, or you can give in other ways in other situations. But giving obviously ignites that principle of reciprocity. And so the more you give, the more you're likely to get. Is actually how I got the biggest pay rise in my career, is because I just kept giving and giving and giving, and I was negotiating on non-salary terms, so I really wanted a promotion, but that just showed that I was pushing. I didn't fight, I just sought more information from my boss as to why I wasn't being promoted or what was required of me. And I think that really paid off in the end, because there are obviously kind of broader market forces out there that can hamstring people. It's important to find out what those are. I think that technique actually worked. When you find the key decision maker, when you give as much as possible to them, quite often they reciprocate and give you quite a lot back. I actually really like this technique as well, because if you rely on the principle of reciprocity, it's always on their terms. You never have to force them or coerce them or threaten them in any way. You just keep giving, and then the person gives on their terms, so we all feel very good about the situation. And I've seen situations in the past where people have done a bit of brinkmanship and being exceptionally assertive around their salary, and I feel like that backfires in the end, because it's the opposite, right? So it's a big take from you, and the person doing the giving often feels like you owe them something, and so you become indebted, and that's not a very nice place to be. This also aligns with Alex Hormozy's approach to sales, which is you just keep giving to the person until they feel obligated to give you something in return. So I am partially validated in that strategy. So there we have it. That's my top 3 tips for successful negotiations. Hopefully I've dispelled the rumors that it's all about brinkmanship and assertiveness. If you want to hear more from me, don't forget to check out this video here. Thanks.